Tuesday morning was unusually cool for September. Lena Morris shivered as she got out of the car and adjusted her scarf. She loved these early hours when the city was still just waking up, and there was a special silence in the air. That was why she always arrived at the Golden Scissors Salon before anyone else, enjoying the quiet before the hectic workday began. Today she had a particularly important client, scheduled, the wife of one of the city councilors who always demanded exceptional attention to detail. Lena wanted to prepare everything in advance so that the session would go perfectly. Reaching the salon door, Lena pulled a bunch of keys out of her bag, a metal ring with a key ring in the shape of tiny gold scissors, a gift from Luke for her 30th birthday. She smiled, remembering how they'd celebrated the date with the entire salon team. Luke Hopkins had been her best friend for 4 years, since the salon had opened a talented stylist with impeccable taste and sense of style. He had quickly become popular among the local elite. He was also the only person with whom Lena could share absolutely everything. Inserting the key into the lock, she was surprised to find the door unlocked. That was odd. Jane, the receptionist, always checked all the locks thoroughly before she left. Perhaps Luke had stayed out late. It happened when he had special clients. Lena pushed open the door and stepped inside. The cabin was semi-dark, with only faint light coming through the blinds. "Luke," she called out, turning on the hall light. "Are you there?" There was no answer. An inner voice told her that something was wrong. There was a strange metallic odor in the cabin. Moving on, Lena noticed an overturned table near Luke's workstation. Makeup products were strewn across the floor, shards of the bottle scattered all over the space. This was not at all like the neat and pedantic Luke. "Luke, this isn't funny." Lena's voice trembled. "If you're trying to scare me, you're doing a good job." She took a few more steps and froze in. Place the scene before her eyes seemed like a scene out of a horror movie. Luke Hopkins was lying on the floor near his desk chair. His body was twisted unnaturally, his white shirt soaked with dark red blood. His eyes, usually sparkling with mirth, stared lifelessly at the ceiling. Next to him, half in the chair, half slumped to the floor, was a woman with a cascade of dark red hair. Even in this position, Lena recognized Rosalind Dap, Luke's regular client, who had been coming to see him for the past few months. Lena's world shook. The room began to spin. Before her eyes, she grabbed the wall to keep from falling. Feeling nausea coming up her throat, without realizing her actions, she pulled out her phone and dialed 3 numbers with trembling fingers. 911, "What's your emergency?" came the calm voice of the operator. "Murder," Lena answered hoarsely, "at the Golden Scissors Salon on 5th Avenue 2. They're dead." The next events merged for Lena into a surreal kaleidoscope. The sound of sirens, uniformed police, officers filling the interior, bright yellow tape fencing off the crime scene. Someone had wrapped her in a blanket. Though she didn't remember being cold, on the contrary, she felt hot. After a while, a tall man in a gray suit appeared in front of her. His appearance was unremarkable. Dark hair with graying at the temples, deep set, brown eyes, thin lips. But the man's gaze was piercing, scrutinizing, as if seeing through Detective David Hammond. "Homicide," he introduced himself, showing his badge. "Did you find the bodies?" Lena nodded, unable to say a word. "Can you talk?" His voice sounded calm, but insistent. "I need to ask you some questions." "Miss Morris," she said at last. "Lena Morris. I'm a stylist. I work here with Luke. Used to." Detective Hammond nodded and sat down next to her, pulling out a notepad. "Tell me what happened this morning," and Lena recounted how she'd arrived early to get ready for a client, how she'd discovered the unlocked door, how she'd found the bodies. "Do you know the woman?" Hammond asked when she was done. "Yes, that's Rosalind Dap. She's a client of Luke's. Comes in, been coming to see him regularly for the last 6 months. Just a client." The detective's eyes flashed with a special interest. Lena hesitated. She wasn't sure if she should talk about Luke's personal life, but these people were dead, and if it would help her find the killer they'd met, she finally said, "Luke had told me they started a relationship about 3 months ago. He was very attracted to her." Detective Hammond wrote something down in his notebook. So they were romantically involved. Yes. Luke said that she hesitated for words. He was very happy with her. Said he'd never felt such a connection with anyone else. At that moment, a young officer approached the detective and said something quietly in his ear. Hammond nodded and turned to Lena. "Miss Morris, we found the murder weapon. It appears to be professional scissors." Lena felt the blood drain from her face. Could they have belonged to the Salon? Yes, she exhaled. Every stylist has their own set of tools. Luke always used handmade Japanese scissors with the initials LH on the blade. They were his pride. The detective nodded and continued asking questions. When was the last time she'd seen Luke? Did he have any enemies? Had she noticed anything unusual in his behavior lately? Their conversation was interrupted by a loud voice from the direction of the entrance. "Where is she? Where's my wife?" A tall man in his 40s wearing an expensive suit burst into the parlor. His face was contorted with panic. "Sir, you can't be here. This is a crime scene." One of the officers tried to stop him. "I got a call from the police. They said that my wife, that Rosalind." Detective Hammond got up quickly and walked toward the man. "Are you Rosalind Dap's husband?" "Yes, I'm Stephen." "Dap, where is she? What happened to her?" Hammond took him aside and began to say something quietly. Lena couldn't hear the words, but she saw the man's face first turn pale and then contorted in pain. He staggered, and the detective had to support him. Wife Lena felt her sides grow cold. Rosalind was married, but Luke had never mentioned it. He wouldn't date a married woman. Not the kind of man he was, or did she just not know her friend as well as she thought she did? A few minutes later, Stephen Dap, supported by an officer, walked past Lena to the bodies to formally identify his wife. His face was a lifeless mask, his eyes reddened with held-back tears. Lena couldn't take her eyes off him. This man had just lost his wife, but she couldn't shake off the strange feeling. Something about his behavior seemed wrong. Detective Hammond's return interrupted her musings. "Miss Morris, we need you to come down to the station for a formal statement. Will you be able to do that now?" Lena nodded. She cast one last glance at the spot where Luke's body lay, now covered with a white cloth. Her best friend was dead, and it seemed she was completely unaware of an important part of his life. What else was Luke hiding, and who could have done this to him? With difficulty getting to her feet, she followed the detective to the exit, unable to shake off the image of Stephen Dap frozen over his wife's body, and the strange feeling that there were far more layers to this story than met the eye. The police station greeted Lena with sterile cleanliness and the hum of muffled voices. The pale green walls, the cold light of fluorescent bulbs, and the smell of cheap coffee enhanced the sense of unreality of what was happening. Detective Hammond escorted her into a small interrogation room, not at all like the ones they showed on the TV shows. No glass mirror, just a simple table, 3 chairs, and a lone camera in the corner. Under the ceiling. "Have a seat. Miss Morris," Hammond pointed to a chair. "Would you like some water or coffee?" Lena shook her head. Her stomach was still clenching at the memory of what she'd seen this morning. "I realize you've been through a lot of trauma," the detective said, a hint of sympathy in his voice, "but the more details you can recall, the faster we can find who did this." The operative, who identified himself as Officer Clark, sat in the corner with a laptop computer preparing to record a statement. Hammond turned on the recorder and formally began the interrogation, stating the date, time, and those present. "Miss Morris, please tell me everything you know about Luke Hopkins and Rosalind Dap's relationship." Lena took a deep breath. Talking about Luke in the past tense was unbearably painful. They met about 6 months ago when Rosalind first came to our salon. Luke had always been very reverent about new clients, but with her, she was different. He noticed her right away. You know what happens when you get a spark between people? That's exactly what happened. You noticed it right away. Noticed it. Yeah, Luke and I were close friends. I could sense that he was, enthusiastic after Rosalind's first visit. He couldn't stop talking about her hair, her smile, her sense of style. Hammond made notes in his notebook. When did their professional relationship turn personal? About 2 months after they met, Rosalind started coming in more often, sometimes unnecessarily, just for a touch-up or styling. And then she started signing up for the last appointment before the salon closed. Lena was silent for a moment, gathering her thoughts. One night, I stayed late to do a product inventory, and I saw them leaving the salon together. Luke had his arm around her waist. He later confided in me that they had started dating. Did he say that Rosalind was single? Hammond asked the question bluntly, watching Lena's reaction carefully. That's right. Lena drew herself forward. Never, not a word had Luke mentioned a husband. I swear to you he wouldn't date a married woman. He had strict principles about that after his ex-girlfriend cheated on him with a married man. Luke always said he would never cause the destruction of someone's family. So, you're suggesting that Luke didn't know about Rosalind's marital status? Lena shook her head. I can't imagine him knowing and continuing the relationship. Rosalind had to hide it. What did Luke tell you about their relationship? Lena thought for a moment, going over memories of the many conversations she'd had with Luke. He'd said he'd never met a woman like her, intelligent, sophisticated with impeccable taste. Rosalind traveled extensively, knew several languages. Luke was fascinated by her. Did he mention her home, her work, her family? As I recall, she worked as an art historian in a private gallery, lived alone in an apartment downtown. At least, that's what she told Luke. And last night, Hammond changed direction. Did you see Luke before he left the salon? Yes, around 6 p.m., we all left except for him. He said he was staying late to prepare a special treatment for a client tomorrow. But Lena paused suddenly, remembering something important. God, he was going to meet Rosalind. Luke had mentioned that she would come later after everyone else had left. He was going to surprise her with the new haircut she'd been wanting for a long time. What time was that supposed to happen? I'm not sure, but I think after 8 o'clock the salon would be empty by then. Hammond nodded as if this information confirmed something he had known before. Tell me, please, about the saloon. Who has the keys to it? The owner. Veronica Allen, the receptionist, Jane Sawyer, me and Luke. No one else has access. We have a strict security policy. Is there a security system? Surveillance cameras? There's an alarm system that the last person to leave has to set off. But Luke was alone yesterday. So Lena didn't finish mentally imagining her friend disabling the system to let Rosalind in. There are cameras only at the main entrance, and in the parking lot behind the building, there are no cameras inside the salon. The customers value privacy. The detective made a few more notes and then pulled a photograph out of a folder. It was Stephen Dap, the man Lena had seen at the salon this morning. Had you ever seen this man before today? Lena scrutinized the photograph. There was something familiar about the features of that face. Wait, she squinted. Yes, I think I've seen him before. Where exactly? Hammond's voice held a peculiar interest at the salon. He's come in a few times in the last couple of months. Lena said, slowly reconstructing those encounters in her mind. The first time he came in to buy a gift certificate. Then he came back a couple of more times. He said he wanted to buy more certificates for his co-workers. But now that I think about it, he asked some strange questions. What kind of questions? About salon hours, which stylists were working late, wondering how long Luke had been with us. Hammond exchanged a quick glance with Officer Clark. Did Luke ever mention this man? Did he pay any attention to these visits? No, I don't think so. Men don't often come into our parlor for nothing. They usually only come in for haircuts by appointment. So his visits were unusual, but Luke was rarely in the reception area, unless he had an appointment. So it was entirely possible that Luke and Stephen Dap had never met. Face to face, Lena wondered it was possible. At least, Luke never mentioned meeting Rosalind's husband. I'm sure he would have told me. Did you notice anything unusual in Luke's behavior? The last few days, he's been enthusiastic even more so than usual, said he, and Rosalind were taking things to a new level. He'd planned to surprise her this weekend. Lena swallowed a lump in her throat, bought tickets to the Impressionist exhibit she'd been talking about, and Rosalind's behavior. Did she come to the Salon regularly? Yes, about once a fortnight officially as a client, but lately she'd been coming more often, usually at the end of the day. Sometimes she'd just drop in for a chat with Luke when he had free time between clients. Hammond continued to ask questions, rebuilding a picture of the relationship between the victims. Lena tried to recall every detail, every passing remark Luke had made about Rosalind, every moment she had seen them together. Had Luke had any conflicts with anyone recently disgruntled? Clients, former partners, professional. Jealousy, no, not at all. Luke was the most non-conflicted person I've ever known. Clients adored him, co-workers respected him. His ex-girlfriend Melanie moved out of state a long time ago. 2 years ago, since then, he'd had only brief relationships. Nothing serious until Rosalind. The interrogation went on for over 2 hours. Hammond methodically explored every detail, every aspect of Luke's life that could have led to tragedy, tired and emotionally drained. Lena could feel her thoughts becoming muddled. I have one more important question to ask, Hammond said after a brief pause. Is there something that bothered you about Luke and Rosalind's relationship? Something that seemed odd, out of place? Lena thought for a moment, going over everything she knew about their relationship. Rosalind had always been cautious. She rarely agreed to go with Luke to public places. In our town, she preferred restaurants in neighboring towns or secluded walks in the countryside. Luke explained it by the fact that she valued privacy, didn't like unnecessary attention. I can see why anything else. Her cell phone, she checked it constantly, sometimes abruptly canceling meetings. If there was a message, Luke said she was very responsible, often consulting with important gallery clients. But now it seems to me Lena didn't finish her sentence, that they could have been calls from her husband. Hammond finished for her. Lena nodded. There is another oddity, she added after a pause. Rosalind had never allowed Luke to take pictures of her or post anything about their meetings on social media. He liked to take photos of his work for the Salon's Instagram, but she always refused. How did Luke feel about these restrictions? He respected her wishes, said it was part of her charm, the mystery, the elusiveness. He found it romantic. God, how blind he was! Lena's voice trembled. So was I. We should have seen something was wrong. Hammond closed the notebook. Sometimes people only see what they want to see, Miss Morris, especially when it comes to the ones we love. He turned off the recorder and stood up. That's enough for today. Officer Clark will escort you out. If you think of anything else, feel free to call any time. He handed her a business card as Lena was on her way out. Hammond called out to her. Miss Morris, one more question. When was the last time you saw Stephen Dap before today? Lena paused, straining her memory. I think last week, Wednesday or Thursday, he'd stopped by briefly asking about the certificates again. But this time, he was somehow tense. He kept looking in the direction of Luke's workstation. Was Luke in the salon at the time? Yes, he had a client. Not Rosalind, she added quickly. I remember, because when Mr. Dap left, Jane, the receptionist, noticed that he was strange. He came in, didn't buy anything and left, like he was looking for something. Are you sure Luke and this man never crossed paths? Not that I know of, but Jane might know more. She's always at reception and sees everyone who comes in. We've already taken her statement. Hammond nodded. Thank you, Miss Morris. You've been very helpful to the investigation. As they left the station, Lena felt completely devastated talking about Luke. It was as if she had relived their friendship every lunch together, every conversation after work, every moment when they supported each other. The city around them was alive with people going about their business cars, honking their horns, the sun breaking through the clouds. But for Lena, the world was forever changed. She lost her best friend and discovered that she may not have known him as well as she thought. The thought of Luke dating a married woman kept her in suspense. It was so unlike him, a man of strong moral principles. The only explanation was that Rosalind had lied to him to hide her marriage. Lena couldn't get rid of the image of Rosalind Dap watching the salon. How long had he known what had made him come in just last night on her way home? Lena drove past the salon. The building was cordoned off with police tape. Police cars parked at the entrance. A small group of people, some of whom Lena recognized as regular customers, were gathered on the sidewalk across the street. They brought flowers and candles, creating an impromptu memorial. She drove past without stopping. She needed to be alone now to try to make sense of everything that had happened. Images of this morning, Luke's body, the blood on the floor. Rosalind's lifeless stare had haunted her every time she closed her eyes. She saw the scene over and over again. One thought pounded in her head. Rosalind Dap knew about his wife's affair. He'd been watching the salon. He was interested in Luke. And last night both Luke and Rosalind had been murdered. Coincidence? Lena didn't believe in coincidences, especially not coincidences. Like that, she remembered the last conversation she'd had with Luke. It had been last night when she'd left the salon. He'd been in an upbeat mood, humming to himself as he prepared to meet Rosalind. "Don't stay up too late," she said jokingly. "I'd stay up all night for her." Luke winked. How bitter those words sounded now as she drove toward her house. Lena decided she would call Detective Hammond tomorrow. Perhaps she would remember something else important. Something that would help her find her friend's killer. After all, it was the only thing she could do for Luke. Now, get justice, and she was determined to help make it happen. It had been 3 days since the murder. Lena couldn't find herself. The salon remained closed. The crime scene was still being investigated by forensic experts. Veronica, the owner of Golden Scissors, was worried about the future of the business, but did not dare to rush the investigation. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Lena hardly slept at all. Every night she woke up in a cold sweat, haunted by nightmares. In them Luke was calling her for help, but she couldn't move. In other dreams, Rosalind, with bloody hair, was pointing at a dark figure in the corner of the salon. The more Lena thought about what had happened, the more details surfaced in her mind. Sitting in the kitchen with an untouched cup of coffee, she mentally went over all the oddities in Rosalind's behavior that she hadn't noticed before. Besides the reluctance to be photographed and the constant checking of her phone, there were other warning signs. Rosalind never gave her home address. Luke always picked her up from a cafe or gallery. She often canceled meetings at the last minute. Unexpected circumstances, urgent work. Now, Lena understood these excuses were probably related to her husband. A phone call interrupted her musings. "Miss Morris, Detective Hammond. Could you come down to the station today? We have some new information I'd like to discuss with you." Lena's heart raced. Sure, when would you like me to come down? The sooner the better. I'll be there all day." An hour later, Lena was already sitting in a familiar office. Hammond looked tired, but there was determination in his eyes. "Thank you for coming so quickly." He pulled out a folder of documents. "We've made significant progress in the investigation." Lena noticed the photos peeking out of the folder. Surveillance footage. "Did you find something?" Cameras in a nearby building captured Stephen Dapp's car in the parking lot outside the Salon. The evening of the murder. He arrived there about 10 minutes after Rosalind at 21:45 and left the place at 22:15. Lena felt a chill run down her spine, so we'd followed her to the saloon. Everything pointed that way. And we also have this Hammond pulled out a clear bag of evidence, a pair of barber's scissors covered in dried blood. Stephen Dapp's fingerprints were found on the murder weapon. We also found his prints on the back door of the salon. Lena stared at the scissors. The same Japanese scissors with Luke's initials on the blade. He came in through the back door, probably no sign of forced entry. The back door was unlocked. Luke had probably left it open for Rosalind. "It's awful," Lena whispered. He was expecting someone else. We checked. Luke Hopkins's cell phone. Hammond continued in it. We found correspondence with Rosalind, which confirms that he really did not know about her marital status. He turned the computer monitor toward Lena. A messenger correspondence was open on the screen. "Luke can't wait for the weekend. Made reservations at that restaurant, on the coast. You mentioned. Rosalind, that sounds delightful. I'm so happy I met you. Luke, someday, we'll wake up together every morning without these secret meetings. Rosalind, soon. I promise I have some things to take care of, Luke. What kind of things? Maybe I can help Rosalind. It's hard to explain. Just trust me. Okay, things will change soon." Lena felt a lump come up to her throat. This was so like Luke. Open, trusting, willing to build a future with a woman who'd lied to him from the beginning. There's something else. Hammond flipped through the correspondence. The last exchange of messages was the evening of the day of the murder. "Luke, I'm at the salon looking forward to seeing you. Got a surprise for you, Rosalind. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I've got something special for you, too. Luke, I can't wait. The back door is open." The last message was sent at 21:20. Hammond explained Rosalind arrived at 21:35 and her husband, as I said, at 21:45. Lena closed her eyes, trying to cope with her emotions. But how did Stephen know where she was? Had he been following her? That's exactly right. On Stephen's phone, we found a location tracking app linked to Rosalind's phone. She probably didn't know about it. She told her husband she was late for work that night, but the app showed her going in a completely different direction. Hammond fell silent, giving Lena time to comprehend the information. She sat still, imagining the last minutes of Luke and Rosalind's lives. How was their meeting supposed to develop? What had happened when her husband suddenly appeared in the parlor? "One thing I don't understand," Lena finally said. "If Stephen Dap followed his wife and knew about her trips to the salon, why did not he intervene earlier? Why wait? That's a good question." Hammond nodded. "We questioned his co-workers and friends. According to them, he had been depressed, withdrawn, often missed work in recent months. Some mentioned problems in his marriage. Maybe he was hoping it was just a temporary fling that would go away. And then something changed. We believe the message about something special was the last straw. Stephen might have thought his wife was planning a major change, perhaps planning to leave him." Lena shook her head, trying to comprehend the tragedy of the situation. "This is all so pointless. Unfortunately, in my practice, most murders are just like that. Senseless, committed in a moment of passion, when emotions override reason." Their conversation was interrupted by a phone call. Hammond apologized and answered it. His expression changed, and he quickly made a few notes in his notebook. "Miss Morris," he said, ending the call. "Could you stay a little longer? Stephen Dap has just agreed to confess, and the prosecutor wants you present as a witness and a close friend of one of the victims." Lena felt her insides tighten at the thought of meeting Luke's killer, but nodded. "Yes, of course, I want to hear his explanation." Half an hour later, Lena was led into another room, more like a conference room. Hammond, the assistant prosecutor, a young woman with a stern expression, and 2 police officers were already there. Soon, Stephen Dap was brought in, accompanied by his attorney. DAP looked gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes and 3 days' stubble. His wrists were handcuffed. Mr. Dap has agreed to confess. In exchange for certain conditions, the assistant prosecutor announced, "This does not constitute a plea bargain that will be decided by the court. We're here to record his version of events." Stephen Dap looked up. His eyes met Lena's for a moment, and she saw in them a mixture of despair, remorse, and a kind of emptiness. "I want to tell you what happened," he said softly. "I can't live with it anymore." Detective Hammond turned. On the recording device, announced the date, time, and people present. "Mr. Dap, tell us what happened." "Monday night at the Golden Scissors Salon." Stephen took a deep breath. "I've suspected that Rosalind was cheating on me for months. She'd changed. She'd become distant often, staying late after work. Sometimes staying out late, explaining that she was traveling on business. I tried to talk to her, but she denied that anything was wrong." He paused, gathering his thoughts. 2 weeks ago, I installed a tracking app on her phone. I followed her movements and noticed that she was regularly visiting that beauty parlor after hours. I went there a few times under the pretense of buying gift certificates to see who she was seeing. "Had you seen Luke Hopkins before that night?" Hammond asked briefly. "I went in one day when he was cutting a customer's hair. The receptionist said he was their best stylist. I realized it was him. When I saw Rosalind looking at him through the window when she thought I couldn't see what happened the night of the murder. Rosalind said she was late for work, but the app showed her heading toward the salon. I was angry. She was lying to me again for the last few weeks. I'd been living in a constant state of tension. Not knowing what to do that night, I decided to follow her and finally find out the truth." Stephen rubbed his face with his hands as far as the handcuffs would allow. "I arrived shortly after her and went in the back door. I heard their voices. They were in the main hall. Luke was saying something about the surprise about his feelings. Rosalind looked worried. She said she had to tell him something." Stephen's voice trembled. "I stepped out of the shadows. Rosalind turned pale when she saw me. Luke looked confused. I introduced myself, said I was Rosalind's husband. He didn't believe me. At first, he looked at her expecting her to deny it, but she couldn't deny it." "What happened next?" Hammond asked quietly. "Chaos?" Luke was in shock. He yelled at Rosalind why she had lied to him. She was crying, trying to explain that she was going to tell him everything today, that she wanted to divorce me but didn't know how to do it. Yeah, I couldn't take it, 6 years of marriage, and she was talking about us like we were some kind of mistake to get rid of. Stephen fell silent, his eyes filling with tears. I don't remember grabbing the scissors. They were on the table by the chair. It all happened so fast, Luke tried to stop me. Got between me and Rosalind. I didn't mean to kill him, I swear, but I was furious. "Do you remember what happened next?" Hammond asked insistently, vaguely. Rosalind screamed, tried to pull me away from Luke, but it was too late. He was already down. Then I turned to her. She was begging, saying she loved me, that we could make things right. But I knew it was a lie, one more lie in an endless chain of deception. There was silence in the room. Lena sat stunned by what she had heard. Stephen Dap's story sounded horrifying but plausible. "What did you do after the murder?" Hammond asked. "I don't know. I really don't remember. Woke up in my car, blood on my clothes, went home. Tried to realize what I'd done. I wanted to give up right away. But I got scared. And when the police called me in the morning, I knew it was the end." The ADA asked a few more follow-up questions. Then Hammond turned off the tape. "Officers, take the detainee away," he ordered. As Stephen Dap was led out of the room, he stopped next to Lena. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Your friend didn't deserve this fate. He was just deceived like me." Lena didn't answer. What could she say to the man who had taken her best friend from her? There was truth in his words. Luke was a victim of deception, caught between two fires in a love triangle he didn't even know existed, but that didn't justify murder after. Stephen left. Hammond approached Lena. "You all right? Would you like some water? I don't know how to feel," she admitted. "Honestly, it's all so confusing." Luke and Stephen were both victims of Rosalind's deception, but only one of them took the scissors. There are rarely only villains or only heroes in these cases. Hammond said thoughtfully, "People make terrible mistakes, make bad decisions, lie to themselves and others. And sometimes it leads to tragedy. What will happen to him now?" Lena nodded toward the door, through which Stephen had been taken. "The court will determine the punishment given the confession and the circumstances. It'll probably be second-degree murder committed under the influence without prior intent. But it's still a felony after leaving the station." Lena got into the car. Strangely, she felt more devastation than grief. Now she knew the truth. The usual story of jealousy and lies. Luke was caught between two fires without even realizing it. Gotta call Veronica, find out about the funeral. She thought, turning on the ignition, then she'd have to deal with Luke's clients. Many of them had only signed up with him, but they might agree to switch to her life. Went on. She'd have to work for two. Luke's funeral was held on Thursday. Lena stood among the other mourners under a gray sky. When the ceremony was over and people dispersed, she walked over to the fresh grave and placed a small gold brooch in the shape of scissors on it. A gift she never got around to giving. Veronica closed, golden scissors, and put the premises up for sale. Lena moved to the Salon style and time on the other side of the city. The owner, who knew about what had happened, did not ask unnecessary questions and gave her time to get used to it. On the first day, the new client, looking through the catalog, shrugged his shoulders. "I want something modern, but not too extravagant." Lena froze for a moment, looking at the man's reflection in the mirror. The same kind of vague wishes always amused Luke. When the client himself doesn't know what he wants, he'd say, "Show him something." He didn't even realize he wanted. "A friend of mine had a signature technique," Lena said, pulling out a pair of scissors. "He called it contour relief. It's modern but elegant. Would you like to try it?" She worked concentratedly, reproducing each movement as Luke had taught her, the particular tilt of the blades, the smooth transitions, the precise balance of volumes and lines. The customer left satisfied, leaving a generous tip. A week later, he returned with a friend. A month later, Lena already had her own regular clientele: contour, relief, and other authors' techniques. Luke became her calling card. She remembered each to the smallest detail, sometimes working on a haircut. She could almost physically feel Luke's presence nearby, in the movements of her hands, in the tilt of her head, in the precision of the lines. It was a strange but comforting feeling. A small part of Luke Hopkins continued to live on in her work, in the haircuts that delighted people, in the style he created. On the 6-month anniversary of his death, Lena received a letter from Luke's mother, asking to meet him over a cup of tea. The elderly woman handed her a worn notebook. He started writing down his ideas and techniques back in Stylist. "School, I think he would like you to have this." Lena accepted the notebook gently. In it were sketches, notes, techniques. Luke had yet to realize a continuation of his work, his legacy. She took a long look at the pages filled with his handwriting, recognizing the ideas he'd talked about and discovering the ones he hadn't had time to mention. A year later, she opened her small salon and called it Contour Relief. In the bright interior pages from Luke's notebook, his sketches of haircuts, sketches of hairstyles, notes on techniques hung on the walls, enlarged and framed. Before ordering these panels, Lena had spent a long time selecting the best works, the ones that most fully showed his talent and vision. Luke's sketches defined the style of the entire salon. His signature techniques became the basis of the concept. His professional secrets were passed on to new stylists. Luke Hopkins continued to live His art clients would ask about the author of the designs. Lena would simply answer a talented stylist, learned a lot from him and kept working.